My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 65 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, in a modest yet cozy house overlooking the calm waters of Lake Union. Life has always been a blend of color and creativity for me. I spent decades as an interior designer, helping families turn their houses into warm, inviting homes. After my husband's sudden passing, I took a step back from the bustling world of design and now run a small community art center where children and elderly alike come to paint, sculpt, and rediscover joy. It's a quieter life than before, but it's mine, and I have learned to cherish every peaceful moment. Yet, as much as I enjoyed the serenity, I was soon reminded that peace can vanish in an instant. My husband's fortune of $350 million was well known, and while I never cared for money in my personal life, the world around me suddenly changed. Relatives, distant family friends, and even acquaintances who had been silent for years began whispering, dropping hints, and subtly suggesting that the inheritance should be divided quickly. I felt a strange mix of disbelief and tension. The same people who had barely spoken to us for years now seemed almost desperate to reach me. I sat in my study one rainy evening, looking at the droplets streaking down the large window. The storm outside mirrored the storm that had suddenly entered my life. I had loved my husband deeply, and his passing left an empty space in the house, an echo of laughter that no one else could fill. Yet, amidst grief, I sensed that this fortune could become a poison, not a gift. I had to protect more than money. I had to protect the values we had built as a family. My instincts screamed that if I acted hastily, I could lose the integrity of our home, our children's innocence, and even my own peace of mind. Sleep became elusive. Each night I would lie awake, imagining the conversations that might happen the next day, the pressure from lawyers and relatives, the possible tension with my children. I realized I couldn't let fear dictate my decisions. This wasn't just about dividing wealth. It was about making a choice that would reflect who I was and what I stood for. I wanted the fortune to serve a purpose, not simply create division or resentment. And deep inside, I knew that the journey ahead would test not only my resolve, but also my understanding of love, trust, and courage. By the end of that first week, I made a silent vow. No one, not even my most persuasive relatives, would rush me into decisions. I would take the time to consider what was right, not what was expected. And in that quiet reflection, I began to prepare myself for the conversations that would shape the future of my family, my children, and the legacy my husband and I had built together. I have 2 children, Lucas Carter, my 37-year-old son, and Maya Carter, my 33-year-old daughter. Lucas is tall, with dark hair that has started to gray at the temples, a reflective and thoughtful man who has always approached life cautiously. Maya is lively, intelligent, and fiercely loyal, with a spark in her eyes that mirrors the warmth of our home. Both have grown into wonderful adults, but they had never faced a situation like this. Sudden wealth, sudden loss, and the pressure of family expectations converging all at once. As I observed them in the days after my husband's passing, I could see the conflict etched on their faces. Lucas would sit quietly, staring at the floor, while Maya paced nervously around the living room. Their eyes often met mine, searching for guidance, reassurance, and answers I didn't yet have. It pained me to see them caught between grief for their father and the unspoken tension of a fortune that could change everything. They loved me, I knew that, but I also sensed their uncertainty, their fear that money might somehow distort our family bonds. I recalled the days when Lucas was a boy and Maya was just a girl, when they would sit at my art table and create little masterpieces, laughing without a care in the world. Back then, life was simple. Now, that simplicity had been replaced by a complicated maze of legal papers, whispered suggestions, and distant relatives trying to influence us. It broke my heart to realize that even in families with strong love, money could seed doubt. Despite their fear, I saw glimmers of trust in their eyes. Lucas would often place a hand over his heart when speaking gently to me, and Maya would touch my arm, offering silent comfort. They were waiting for me to make a decision, to show courage, to provide direction. And in that quiet waiting, I felt both responsibility and determination swelling inside me. This wasn't just about preserving wealth. It was about preserving our family's soul, our values, and the lessons I had tried to teach them all their lives. That evening, as we sat together in the living room, I gently spoke. This is not just about money. It's about who we are, what we stand for, and how we choose to leave a mark in this world. I need you to trust me, even if it feels difficult. Both Lucas and Maya nodded, understanding more than I could have imagined. It was the beginning of a shared journey, a promise that we would face the challenge together, with courage, patience, and heart. My late husband's fortune of $350 million suddenly became the centerpiece of every conversation around me. Friends who had not visited in years called. Distant relatives popped up unannounced, and even casual acquaintances seemed to find a reason to reach out. Each interaction carried a subtle expectation: divide, share, or allocate the wealth according to someone else's plan. I felt the pressure mounting like an invisible weight pressing on my chest. What shocked me most was how quickly greed could reveal itself. People I had known politely for decades suddenly appeared impatient, anxious, and sometimes aggressive, trying to convince me that their ideas were in my family's best interest. They spoke of investments, real estate, charitable donations. But I quickly realized that their good advice was often self-serving. It became clear that my husband's fortune, which had been meant as a blessing, could easily turn into a source of strife. In those days, I kept a journal. I wrote down every conversation, every suggestion, every subtle manipulation. Writing helped me stay grounded. I reminded myself that this fortune wasn't just money, it was a responsibility. How it was used would define not only my legacy, but also the lessons my children would carry forward. I wanted them to understand that wealth should serve a purpose beyond personal gain. I also reflected on my husband. He had worked hard, lived humbly, and loved generously. He would have wanted us to do something meaningful, to create value for those in need. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered his laughter, his patience, and the way he always reminded me that life was about love, compassion, and integrity. Those memories became my compass, guiding every decision I made in the midst of mounting pressure. By the end of the third week, I realized that acting quickly was dangerous. I could not let fear, pressure, or the opinions of others dictate my choices. I had to step carefully, think deliberately, and ensure that any decision aligned with what was right, not what was convenient. I knew this path would be challenging, but I also knew that courage and patience were the only ways to safeguard both my family and my husband's true legacy. The pressure from lawyers and relatives intensified with every passing day. I was invited, or rather, summoned, to countless meetings, both formal and informal. Contracts were drafted, revised, and pushed toward my signature, all under the guise of making the process easier. Some relatives suggested that it would be better if I delegated the responsibility to my children. Others implied that I was being difficult for no reason. Sitting in my study late one evening, I stared at the stack of legal documents on my desk. The room was silent, except for the hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. I could feel my pulse in my temples as I read through each clause, each condition, imagining what would happen if I signed too quickly or allowed someone else to make the decisions for me. The weight of the fortune pressed down, not as a blessing, but as a test of patience and resolve. I also thought about Lucas and Maya. How would they feel if I made the wrong choice? Would they grow up believing that wealth defines people rather than integrity? The thought alone made my chest tighten. I realized that my actions now would shape not only the immediate future, but the moral compass of my children for years to come. That night, I made a quiet decision. I would not be rushed. I would not let anyone manipulate me with words, authority, or guilt. I had always taught my children to value honesty and empathy over material gain. Now, I had to embody those lessons myself. The responsibility was enormous, but I felt a strange sense of empowerment. In standing firm, I was honoring my husband, my children, and the values that had guided our family for decades. Observing Lucas and Maya during those tense weeks was both heartbreaking and inspiring. They oscillated between hope and anxiety, love and fear. Lucas would often sit at the dining table, lost in thought, sketching ideas on a notepad, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle he didn't fully understand. Maya, on the other hand, would pace the living room, speaking softly to herself, occasionally looking at me with questions in her eyes that she didn't voice aloud. I realized that their reactions weren't just about money, they were about trust. Could they trust me to make the right choice? Could they trust themselves to navigate the complexities of sudden wealth without losing sight of who we were? I knew I had to guide them carefully, speak honestly, and show them that courage sometimes meant making difficult decisions. One quiet evening, I gathered them together in the living room. Rain tapped against the window, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. I looked at both of them and said, "Money can never define who we are. Our actions, our choices, and how we treat others define us. Are you ready to trust me to do what is right?" Lucas and Maya exchanged a glance and then nodded. There were tears in Maya's eyes, and Lucas placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. That single moment of mutual trust became the foundation for the decisions we would make together. I felt a mixture of relief and resolve. I was not alone in this journey, and together we could ensure that our family's values and my husband's legacy would be honored. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure from relatives and family friends only intensified. Every phone call, every message seemed to carry an underlying expectation. "Evelyn, surely you don't want to delay this forever," said one distant cousin during a brunch I had reluctantly attended. I smiled politely, but felt a storm brewing inside. Their polite words masked impatience, subtle greed, and even judgment. The weight of the fortune had become a magnet for people's desires, testing not only my patience, but also my moral compass. Late at night, I would sit in the quiet of my art room, surrounded by canvases and unfinished sculptures, and reflect on what was truly important. The fortune, vast and tempting as it was, could easily fracture relationships that had taken decades to build. I thought of Lucas and Maya, and how their eyes often betrayed a mix of worry and hope. They were looking to me for guidance, for courage, for a steady hand amidst chaos. The realization struck me hard. This was not simply about money. This was about preserving our family's integrity. about teaching my children the true value of decisions rooted in ethics rather than expediency. One evening, as rain lashed against the windows, I found myself writing letters, not to send, but to organize my thoughts. Letters to Lucas, letters to Maya, letters to the relatives who pressed for quick action. I wrote about the responsibilities that came with wealth, about honoring my late husband's legacy, and about the moral duty to help those who truly needed it. In writing, I found clarity. I realized that I could not be swayed by fear or pressure. Every step had to be deliberate, thoughtful, and guided by a higher purpose. When Lucas peeked into the room, he noticed my pensive state. He said softly, "Mom, you've always guided us with your heart. We trust you. Whatever you decide, we're behind you." Maya, following closely, added, "Yes, Mom. You've always done what's right, even when it was hard. We believe in you." Their words warmed me, strengthening the resolve that had begun to take shape over those sleepless nights. I was not alone. Together, we would navigate this challenge and ensure that our choices reflected love, responsibility, and integrity. By the end of the week, I felt a sense of purpose settle over me. The fortune was no longer merely a source of pressure or potential conflict. It was a tool, a responsibility to wield wisely. I would take every precaution, involve my children in meaningful conversations, and ensure that our actions reflected the principles we had lived by as a family. It was a daunting path, but one I was determined to walk with courage and clarity. The next challenge came from the legal side. My husband's lawyer, a sharp and meticulous man named Richard, whom I had trusted for years, insisted on meetings to expedite the paperwork. "Evelyn, we need the signatures," he said firmly, tapping the pen against a folder filled with contracts. "The sooner the estate is processed, the smoother it will be for everyone involved." I could see the efficiency in his eyes, but also the cold detachment that wealth often breeds. To him, this was business. To me, this was personal, emotional, and moral. I asked for time, explaining that my decisions needed careful thought. But Richard was insistent, presenting clause after clause, figures, and legal conditions. I noticed how some relatives lingered in the background, their eyes flitting between me and the documents, silently urging me to comply. It was exhausting, and the tension in the room was palpable. I realized then that standing firm would require more than patience. It would require strategy, courage, and unwavering conviction. That evening, I walked alone through the quiet streets of Seattle, reflecting on the situation. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, and I could hear the soft hum of distant traffic. The world seemed indifferent to my struggle, yet I felt a profound sense of determination building within me. I thought of Lucas and Maya, how they looked to me for guidance, and how their understanding of responsibility would be shaped by the choices I made now. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions, nor could I allow others to push me into decisions that contradicted my values. At home, I spoke with my children about the upcoming meetings, explaining the pressure and the tactics that might be used. I told them, this isn't about speed or compliance. It's about integrity. We will do what is right, not what others demand. Lucas and Maya listened intently, nodding in silent agreement. They trusted me, and that trust became the anchor I needed to withstand the mounting pressure from lawyers, relatives, and friends alike. By the end of the week, I realized that courage wasn't just about confronting others. It was about confronting fear within myself. I knew I had to make a decision that aligned with the principles my husband and I had lived by, and that would set an example for my children about how wealth should be handled responsibly. The weight of the fortune had shifted from a source of anxiety to a moral compass. guiding every step I took toward a solution that would honor our family's values. As the weeks passed, my internal reflection deepened. Late at night, I would sit alone in my study, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of letters, legal documents, and journals I had been keeping. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards and the distant hum of the city. In these moments, I realized the true challenge wasn't the fortune itself, it was navigating human nature. Greed, fear, and impatience were everywhere, even among those closest to me. I also thought about the legacy my husband had left behind, not just the fortune, but the principles he had lived by. He had always valued honesty, compassion, and responsibility. He would have wanted the money to serve a purpose beyond personal gain. Each night I would whisper his name, asking for guidance, and slowly clarity began to emerge. I knew the path forward was to involve my children, deliberate carefully, and resist the pressure of those who sought convenience over integrity. During one particularly stormy night, Lucas joined me in the study. He looked at me with concern, noticing the tension etched on my face. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked gently. "You've been carrying this alone for too long." Maya appeared shortly after, her eyes searching mine, silently asking how she could help. I realized then that my children weren't just observers. They were participants, partners in a journey that demanded courage and ethical clarity. I spoke to them honestly about the meetings, the pressure from relatives, and the subtle manipulations we were facing. "We have to act with patience," I said. "We have to make sure every decision reflects who we are as a family, not what others expect from us." Lucas placed a reassuring hand on mine, and Maya smiled softly. In that moment, I felt the bond of trust solidify, giving me the confidence to continue. By the end of the night, I had made a firm internal commitment. The fortune would not control us. We would control how it was used. It would be a tool for good, a reflection of our values, and a lesson for Lucas and Maya about responsibility, courage, and integrity. This resolve became my anchor as the pressure from the outside world continued to mount. One evening, I gathered Lucas and Maya in the living room. Rain pattered against the windows, and the scent of wet earth filled the room. The house was silent except for our breathing, and I knew the moment was important. "This fortune isn't just money," I said gently, looking at both of them. "It's a responsibility, and how we handle it will define who we are. Are you ready to trust me to make the right choice?" They exchanged a glance, understanding more than words could convey. Lucas nodded slowly. "Mom, we've always trusted you. We know you'll do what's right." Maya, with tears in her eyes, added, "Yes, Mom, we believe in you completely." Their trust gave me the strength I needed, reinforcing that I wasn't alone in this journey. That night, I reflected on the magnitude of the decision ahead. The fortune could create opportunities for good, or it could sow division and resentment if handled poorly. I thought about families who could benefit from education, healthcare, and support. I thought about the lessons Lucas and Maya would carry into adulthood. Every choice, every action would leave an imprint on their understanding of integrity, compassion, and courage. I also thought about the relatives and friends pressuring me. Their impatience, subtle manipulations, and hidden agendas only reinforced my belief that caution and deliberate thought were essential. I had to act not just legally, but morally, ensuring that every step aligned with our family's values and legacy. By the end of that evening, I made a silent vow. The fortune would serve a higher purpose. I would guide Lucas and Maya through this process, teaching them not only about wealth management, but about moral responsibility, empathy, and leadership. It was a daunting task, but together we were ready to face it with courage and clarity. Finally, after days of reflection, discussion, and planning, I made the first concrete step. I decided that the entire fortune would go into a trust dedicated to education and healthcare for families who truly needed help. It wasn't an easy decision. The weight of the responsibility pressed heavily on me, and I knew there would be opposition, questions, and even anger from some relatives. Yet, deep inside, I felt a profound sense of horrity and purpose. Lucas and Maya were immediately involved. Lucas began reviewing the logistics and legal structure, while Maya focused on identifying potential beneficiaries and programs that aligned with our goals. Their engagement reassured me that the decision was not mine alone. It was a shared commitment to uphold our family's values. Watching them take ownership, guided by integrity rather than greed, filled me with pride and hope. When I informed Richard, the lawyer, about the trust, he raised his eyebrows in surprise, but respected my decision. The relatives, predictably, expressed displeasure, but I remained resolute. I realized that true courage often comes with discomfort, resistance, and even conflict. But it is precisely these moments that define character. As the paperwork began to take shape, I noticed a shift within myself. The fear and pressure that had dominated my days were replaced with purpose and determination. I had transformed a potential source of division into an opportunity for positive impact, and the sense of empowerment was both humbling and invigorating. That evening, as Lucas and Maya reviewed the initial plans, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The fortune was no longer a source of anxiety or conflict. It was a vehicle for compassion, education, and hope. And in guiding my children through this process, I knew that we were all learning a lesson that transcended money. Responsibility, integrity, and love are the true legacies we leave behind. The weeks following the establishment of the trust were not without challenges. As expected, there was pushback from distant relatives who felt entitled to the fortune. Some argued, some complained, and a few even tried to intimidate me into altering my plans. I learned quickly that when wealth is involved, people reveal their true colors, but I remained steadfast, reminding myself daily why I had chosen this path. The fortune wasn't for personal gain. It was a tool to help those truly in need, and I could not allow fear or greed to sway my judgment. Lucas and Maya became my pillars of support. They accompanied me to meetings, discussed strategies, and offered emotional strength when the pressure became overwhelming. I noticed how their understanding of responsibility deepened with each interaction. They were learning firsthand that wealth is not just a number. It's a test of character, compassion, and patience. I felt a surge of pride, realizing that the lessons I had hoped to instill in them over the years were now unfolding in real life. Even with the opposition, there were moments of profound gratitude. Families who received early support wrote letters and sent photos, expressing their relief and happiness. Reading these messages late at night, I felt a sense of purpose that no money could buy. Each story reminded me that our actions had the power to change lives, and that the trust was more than a legal document. It was a lifeline. The lawyer, Richard, who had been skeptical at first, slowly began to show respect for our approach. He observed how methodical and committed we were, and even the most critical relatives started to realize that we would not be swayed. The experience taught me a crucial lesson. Standing firm in your convictions may invite temporary discomfort, but it ultimately garners respect and lasting impact. By the end of this period, I could finally breathe a little easier. I knew that the road ahead would still have obstacles, but the foundation was solid. Lucas and Maya were aligned with our mission, and the trust was actively making a difference. The sense of unity and shared purpose in our family reassured me that we had made the right choice. As the trust began to operate fully, I saw the tangible impact of our decisions. Children received scholarships, families received medical care, and entire communities felt a ripple effect of support. Witnessing this transformation firsthand was deeply moving. I often found myself sitting quietly in the evenings, looking at letters of gratitude, photos of happy children, and notes from families whose lives were now changed. Each story reinforced my belief that we had chosen wisely. Lucas, now fully immersed in overseeing the trust's operations, displayed a maturity and dedication that made me proud. Maya, equally committed, worked tirelessly to ensure that every family selected met the criteria of need and potential impact. Watching my children step into these roles with integrity was a reward beyond measure. Their growth mirrored the transformation of the fortune itself, from a source of tension to a beacon of hope. Yet, even amid this success, there were moments of doubt and exhaustion. Handling the logistics, meeting the demands of the trust, and responding to curious relatives tested my patience daily. But every time I felt fatigue creeping in, I reminded myself of the purpose behind our actions. The fortune was not for indulgence, it was for service, and the reward lay not in recognition or applause, but in seeing lives improved. Through this process, I also learned more about myself. I realized that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to act rightly despite it. Patience, too, became a skill honed under pressure. Each challenge became a teacher, each decision a lesson. And slowly, the anxiety that had once consumed me began to transform into quiet confidence. By the end of this stage, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The fortune, once a potential source of conflict, had become a force for good. Lucas and Maya were not just beneficiaries. They were partners in a mission that extended beyond our family, shaping lives and teaching lessons that no amount of money could measure. As months passed, I noticed how the fortune had subtly reshaped our family dynamics. Relatives who had been impatient gradually accepted our choices, some even expressing admiration for our commitment to integrity. Lucas and Maya had become more confident, empathetic, and grounded. They had witnessed firsthand how difficult decisions could be navigated with morality and courage, and I knew these lessons would shape their future forever. I often reflected on the lessons hidden within this journey. Wealth, I realized, is a double-edged sword. It can reveal character, expose greed, and create tension, or it can inspire generosity, teach responsibility, and foster unity. The choice lies not in the money itself, but in how we handle it. This understanding became my guiding principle, and I made it my mission to instill it in my children daily. Even with all the good we were achieving, I never underestimated the responsibility we carried. Every decision had to be deliberate, ethical, and aligned with the vision of service my husband and I had imagined. The magnitude of the fortune was intimidating, but it also provided the opportunity to leave a legacy of compassion that would outlast us both. Lucas and Maya were now integral to the decision-making process. Together, we evaluated requests, allocated resources, and ensured that the trust operated transparently. I watched my children grow into leaders who understood that integrity and empathy are more valuable than any amount of money. Their development was the most beautiful outcome of this journey, more than the fortune itself. By the end of the year, the trust had positively impacted countless families. The initial tension, fear, and anxiety were replaced by a sense of purpose, accomplishment, and unity. We had transformed what could have been a source of conflict into a legacy of hope, resilience, and ethical leadership. The transformation wasn't just external, it was deeply personal. I discovered strength within myself that I hadn't fully recognized before. I had faced pressure, skepticism, and even subtle manipulation, yet I had remained committed to my principles. Lucas and Maya had learned to navigate complex ethical decisions, to act with compassion, and to value integrity over expedience. Together, we had built more than a trust. We had built a family legacy grounded in love, responsibility, and moral courage. The families benefiting from the trust continued to inspire me. Letters, photographs, and occasional visits reminded us of the real impact of our choices. Each story reinforced that the fortune was fulfilling its true purpose. Watching children pursue education, parents access healthcare, and communities experience hope reaffirmed that we had made the right decision. I often thought back to the nights of anxiety and sleepless reflection. Those moments of doubt and uncertainty were now distant memories, replaced by confidence and fulfillment. The journey had tested us in every way imaginable, emotionally, mentally, and morally. But it had also revealed the true essence of our family's strength. Lucas and Maya often reminded me of the lessons learned. "Mom," Lucas said one evening, "we've realized that wealth is only powerful when it serves others." Maya added, "And we've learned that courage is about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Their words warmed my heart and reminded me that our mission was as much about personal growth as it was about financial stewardship. Through all of this, I felt a profound sense of closure. The fortune, once a source of tension, had become a source of meaning. We had honored my husband, strengthened our family, and created a legacy that would continue to inspire generations. Finally, as the trust became fully operational and the initial waves of opposition settled, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey had been tumultuous, emotional, and at times overwhelming, but it had also been transformative. I realized that wealth, while powerful, is meaningless without a moral compass. Integrity, empathy, and responsibility are the true measures of legacy. Lucas and Maya had grown immensely. They had learned to handle pressure, make ethical decisions, and embrace responsibility with courage. I watched them interact with the beneficiaries, offer guidance, and support each other. The family I had nurtured was now stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than ever. One quiet evening, I gathered them both in the living room, rain softly tapping against the windows. I looked at them and said, "Remember this always. Wealth is not a legacy. Responsibility is. Love, respect, and integrity are the real inheritance." They nodded, their eyes filled with understanding and gratitude. The fortune had begun as a potential source of conflict, fear, and anxiety, but it had transformed into a tool for hope, education, and compassion. Families had been helped, my children had matured, and our family bond had strengthened. I realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt, had led to this clarity and fulfillment. Looking back, I understood the life lesson my husband had hoped to teach through our journey. Courage, patience, and integrity are more valuable than money. And true wealth lies in the positive impact we leave behind. Even now, years later, Whenever someone asks about my story, I smile and say, wealth is not a legacy. Responsibility is. Love, respect, and integrity are the real inheritance. And in that truth, I found peace, pride, and an enduring sense of purpose.